everyone watching this will know Satoshi, right? And so the kind of the flip side of that is Luca Paciololi, who essentially created modern accounting, double entry bookkeeping. And so what we saw from that was just a huge influx of better information flowing from business to business, city to city, really a communication tool that revolutionized how business was being done. It seems really simple today. It's like, how else would you do it, right? But that was kind of a revolutionary change that was kind of the last great innovation in accounting until you get to 2009, right? Where you have this new way to track payment flows from one entity to another. And it's all out there in the open in real time. Accounting right now is moving in that direction of like, hey, we don't want to do books closing once a year, once a month. We want to know every day. And so Bitcoin pushes you way down the line of like, hey, how about every 10 minutes, right?
All right, welcome back to Bitcoin is Hard. This is a Choice App production about Bitcoin and personal finance. And today, very excited because we found our accounting guest, guys. We found the accounting guest. We're going to make this just awesome, fast, and punchy for you. We have Joe Wood of Satoshi Pacioli Accounting. And I'm not even going to let him give us our background or anything like that. I'm going to completely skip over that. We're going to come back to it. We're just going to get right to the heart of it. Joe, if a small business wants to put Bitcoin on its balance sheet, what should it do? Like, what are the steps?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, you probably started at probably the easiest example there, and that's probably the easiest one to do. Of if you're a small business, you don't have public filing disclosures, and you really want to get Bitcoin on your balance sheet, most companies are going to be able to just go out there, purchase. You have to have a business account, but you can buy that and handle the accounting on it internally. It really gets a lot more complicated from there as far as what you can do with Bitcoin in a business. But that's kind of step one. I'm a business. I have excess cash. Set up an account. You can purchase Bitcoin with that with your balance sheet.
Perfect. So even just starting right there, like a business account, in your experience, do most of the exchanges have this, or like how does an owner go about finding an exchange that will let them set up a business account, and what should they know that's different than setting up a personal account?
Yeah, I don't know all the details on which exchange require what. I know it's more complicated. Just in that, if you think, I guess, compare it to setting up a bank account, right? If you're an individual, you have a social security number, you have ID, all that. Businesses are just going to have more requirements, more business documentation that they're going to have to provide to an exchange. It's the same KYC, AML requirements that the banking section has. So you're going to have to follow those, and businesses just have more documentation they have to provide.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So, and that leads directly into, this is kind of a base level question I have, because I've been meeting more and more like small business owners through holding meetups. Basically, is my thing into this is meetups now across the country are looking for bars and restaurants, and we're getting, Bitcoiners are getting into more and more conversations with bar owners and restaurant owners that like are hosting these meetups. And so there's two things to talk about. It's like taking Bitcoin as payment, but then also just like Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And so I'm trying to educate the audience also and educate myself on like what it's like to be a business owner. So that's where this question is coming from. What's the difference between like a bookkeeper and an accountant? And then a CPA. So you get the owner on the phone, or they come to your meetup. They understand there's a lot. They're either a Bitcoiner themselves, or they understand there's a lot of local interest in Bitcoin. Somehow they get to this decision point of like, this makes total sense. Like, let's do it. What then happens? They email their bookkeeper, they email their accountant. Like, who's then going to the exchange and typing in the information?
Yeah, that will certainly vary by business, what kind of expertise they have. Kind of to answer your first part, like bookkeeper, accountant, CPA, those are largely going to be interchangeable sometimes. Certainly, a CPA is an accountant, can do bookkeeping. Bookkeeper is not necessarily a CPA, and so I wouldn't get hung up on those titles things, but certainly talking to somebody and listening to their background is going to give you a good insight there. But as far as what you need to kind of get that account set up, it really is going to go back to kind of what's your knowledge of not necessarily even accounting, but your business, right? Like, did you do all the initial incorporation, legal filings? A lot of founders are going to have done that. A lot of, even if you just set up a nonprofit, you're going to be familiar with that. And so if
Mhm.
you're familiar with that, you're going to also be familiar with the documentation that they're going to need to get you set up with your account. And so certainly pulling in an accountant, you can do at any point in time. But if you are just starting up, you're likely familiar with a lot of the stuff that you need. And so I would probably recommend starting the process. You're probably going to be able to get through it. And if you run into a hurdle and then you say, I don't know what they're talking about here, a lot of this stuff ends up being terminology, right? Of like, oh,
Mhm.
I had that. I just didn't know that's what it was called, right? And
Yep.
so really getting that information across. And so, I think as we go along, more and more accountants will become familiar with Bitcoin exchanges, just like they work with banks every day. We're just
Mhm.
not there yet, where your CPA that's in your town might not be an expert on it.
Yep. I was talking to a bar owner just the other day and this is for the audience also. Like, I use the word bank in a very like neutral way. Like, I agree with you that I think that's going to be like, you have a business bank account for your USD, and then you have a Bitcoin bank account for your Bitcoin. And then you can talk about custody and things down the line after that. But it's just encouraging to hear, like, my takeaway from even this initial first 3 minutes is like, it doesn't have to be hard. Like, it's just like anything else. Like, just chunk it down one step at a time.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, so with that, like, bouncing off of that, now tell us about your background. Like, tell us about your accounting firm, your background. Tell us about the name Pacioli, because I know that carries like a lot of history with it. And
Yeah,
then kind of segue into like, who's your ideal client? Like, what are you hoping to achieve?
yeah. So briefly on my background, kind of a typical accounting experience. I started in audit, which a lot of people do, which just gives you great experience working with a bunch of different entities, especially right out of college where you don't know exactly what you're doing, right? So started in auditing and then did some financial reporting at larger companies, smaller companies, general ledger reporting, and then just also on the operational side of things. So how do you actually get the money out, money coming in, and so a broad range of experience there, a lot of different types of organizations. I think really helps give you a broad overview of what are the particular difficulties and opportunities for each type of organization. As far as Satoshi Pacioli, I started it roughly 6 months ago, really with the goal to say like, hey, I have accounting experience. I'm a Bitcoiner. I really want to get into this world. How can I immediately make an impact? I'm not a coder. I don't have a tech
Mhm.
background. And so really just kind of pulling on my experience and trying to apply that as much as possible. And so really kind of, I think my ideal target is like, how do I help businesses, organizations that are just starting up, and then potentially more established companies as well if they need temporary support. That's something that's currently kind of a really common thing for, if you're a large company, medium-sized company, you can go to a temp accounting firm and just say, hey, I need an accountant for 2 weeks. I need an accountant for this one project. Bitcoiners aren't necessarily going to have that now. So trying to create a space there as well, knowing that there's going to be accountants that really care about accounting, can't quit their day job yet, but I could pick up 10, 15 hours potentially a week to kind of help out with a project here and there. And so that's kind of where I'm focused on, where I really want to try to add value to the space. And to the question as far as Pacioli, so everyone watching this will know Satoshi, right? And so the kind of the flip side of that is Luca Pacioli, who was not going to try to guess the year, but it was in the 1400s. Essentially created modern accounting, double entry bookkeeping, and so what we saw from that was just a huge influx of better information flowing from business to business, city to city, really a communication tool that revolutionized how business was being done. It seems really simple today. It's like, how else would you do it, right? But that was kind of a revolutionary change that I think was kind of the last great innovation in accounting until you get to 2009, right? Where you have this new a way to track money and payment flows for one entity to another, and it's all out there in the open in real time, which is just something that, like, accounting right now is moving in that direction of like, hey, we don't want to do books closing once a year, once a month. We want to know every day. And so
Mhm.
Bitcoin pushes you way down the line of like, hey, how about every 10 minutes, right? So
Mhm.
that's kind of the mashing of the names there, kind of trying to combine those two.
Yeah. No, I love that. What is double entry accounting? Can you
Yeah.
tell us more? Like, what was that?
Yeah, so essentially it's really just saying for every transaction there's two sides of it, right? And so I can't do anything without uh, creating another uh, transaction. So if I'm going to purchase something, right, I am giving up some cash presumably, and I'm getting a donut potentially.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so that's two sides of that transaction. There's always a debit and a credit, and so it's either going to be something that makes you more wealth in the future that you're giving up for today. So you're reducing cash. You're potentially buying an asset that will increase your business kind of profitability. And so there's a whole bunch of different ways that can work, but it's really just saying it to keep it simply. There's a debit and a credit for every transaction, and how that works. Essentially, your everything always has to be balanced, and kind of relating that back to Bitcoin, right? Is we know we can't create things out of thin air. There has to be proof of work there, and so it goes back to that conservative side of saying there's no way to kind of there's no transaction that you can get for free, right? There's always
Yep.
a counteracting force to it.
Yeah. Perfect. And so that leads into like, so after you go through the process of setting up the business account at an exchange, the USD moves from the business USD account either via ACH network or via wire to the exchange. And the exchange helps you, like, you give up your USD, receive the Bitcoin. Then what happens?
So then you have a lot of options, right?
Mhm.
And so that probably gets into what's the size of your business, um, what's your risk tolerance, and what's your technical competence, right? And so you can probably start with the easiest example. I'm a sole proprietor, right? And I want to go buy some Bitcoin. I can go buy it, and then I can say, thank you, pull it off the exchange, and custody that myself, right?
Mhm.
And so I have the ability and all the rights within my business to be able to do that if I'm a sole proprietor. From there, it gets more complicated, right? Let's say I have a 5-person business and we have 5 owners, right? What am I going to end up doing there if I want to do self custody? That gets more complicated, and that can 5 people hold keys? There's multi sig there, which is probably your next level up, right? So there's probably options there as far as a medium sized business. And then you get even more complicated with, let's say,
Mhm.
MicroStrategy, publicly
Yep.
traded. They can't have Michael Saylor holding the keys to billions of dollars of Bitcoin, right? So
Right.
that's where I don't know what their solution is, but custody is, at an exchange is going to be much more common, and it's going to be much harder to be able to say, hey, there's this new thing called Bitcoin. We hold it on our balance sheet. There's 5 people at our
Mhm.
organization. We make sure they don't collude, and you can do all that. That's going to be a big hurdle for people to get over, though.
Totally. So pulling it back to the sole proprietor, with they make the exchange at the exchange. What happens at the accounting level? Like, what then when they are closing their books once a month, or closing their books once a week, or whatever their schedule is? What how's it treated?
Yeah. So this is again where publicly traded companies have kind of a different set of accounting
Yeah.
guidelines where you have the PCAOB that kind of gives a lot of guidance there, which is public accounting.
I, we're gonna
Uh,
fully tackle that. I want to tackle that, and I want to get your opinion about FASB and all of
yeah,
that. 100%.
but yeah,
Uh,
to
yeah.
answer your initial question though, they can adjust that on as often as you want, but really I would say monthly basis to be able to
Mhm.
say I bought one Bitcoin, it was worth 20,000. It went up to 25. At the end of the month, when you're doing all your reconciliations for your month, when you want to see where you're at as a financial position, you can adjust that as based on the current value. And so your balance sheet's going to adjust based on the value of the Bitcoin at the time at the end of the month.
So, and what about this? How would a business be able to a private business, small to medium, would they be able to track, like, they have it within their right to also like to track in USD and to track in sats, right? So like I kind of want to break apart the units wise also. Like if they talk to us about that, and if it's helpful to talk about foreign currency, I did want to kind of bring that into of like if it's helpful to just toss Bitcoin out of the example for a second and just say how do multi-currency businesses work in general? I'm totally happy to dive down that also.
Yeah. So that's where it will get interesting, more complicated. I don't have a ton of experience on the ForEx side necessarily. Never worked with a business that actually had multiple currencies. But kind of to your point of Bitcoin, I think probably taking a step back is saying a business can do their accounting the way they want to. I mean, we have GAAP, and those are generally accepted accounting principles. And the goal there is to say, how do I best tell you what the current financial state of my company is? How is it operating? What is it doing? And so your base, everyone that external to you is probably going to say like, what's the US dollar amount, right? And so that's going to be GAAP. That's what you're going to be based on. That's what you're kind of be. If the bank wants to know about something, that's what you're going to be reporting on.
Or if you go to list on like Biz Buy Sell, like you saying that our books are according to GAAP is like a helpful thing for the broker, right?
Exactly.
Like it all just,
That doesn't mean that you can't look at your business the way you view your business, right? And so that's where I'm saying, if I want to be able to, if I have a really Bitcoin based business and I'm receiving money in Bitcoin, I'm paying in Bitcoin, and I hold Bitcoin, it's perfectly logical to say when I'm doing my financial statements and how I want to look at it from month to month, I'm reviewing it in Satoshis versus US dollars. And so that's a mindset change. And I think we're probably a ways away from most businesses being able to do that, but it'll become more common. And I think to your point, it starts with, yes, I have USD, but I also want to do Satoshis. And then
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question at the software level on that also? Like, I want to hear more on the mindset, but then even at the software level or like at your Excel sheet level, what tools is the only solution to do it on Excel by yourself if you want to also do it in Sats, or what stuff is out there?
Yeah, so I'm not aware of anything right now that tracks in Sats. I know you had on John from ZapRight, who's working on a solution there that I think has a lot of promise, where everything's built in US dollars and Sats, which gives you all the information, the foundational structure to be able to create that. But nothing exists today where Bitcoin is built in as a foreign exchange amount where you could just show them side by side. So unfortunately, I think that's the way you do it. And then you get into issues of how often am I doing that, right? Where if I am doing it every month, it's easy to kind of do. But if I want to see it more often than that, then I'm doing a lot more accounting.
Yeah. Do you think that ForEx is the most helpful analogy to make, or is another way to look at it like I'm trying to draw analogy. What are other examples of items what's the most helpful analogy? Is it the helpful analogy to think about the Bitcoin at the exchange as, oh, that's our Bitcoin bank account? Or is it more helpful to think about it as like, oh, like we also own this building or we own this fleet of car? Like how often is the building, marked to whatever it says?
Yeah.
Versus, or like your pizza maker, your like hood oven. How often is that marked to market, I guess?
Yeah. So I think it's tough to make the Forex conversion, and that Forex really is, I'm a US dollar business, but I do some stuff in another currency. What we're really talking about is looking at your balance sheet in a different way in two different currencies, right? And so um, I think for your oven example, right? If you're a pizza maker, you bought the equipment for $20,000. You depreciate it over time. That's kind of the GAAP way to do it. Over whatever it is, 10 years, it depreciates. It gets lower and lower on your balance sheet. Um, that's I mean, you can do all that the same way with Bitcoin. In that I purchased the stove for $10,000. It's going to depreciate over time, right? But then also what I paid for it in Satoshis is going to change over time. And so it wouldn't really make sense logically in my head, at least, to say like, oh, I paid $10,000 for it, and
Yeah,
then Bitcoin, 10x, and now I actually paid 100,000.
for
So,
sure.
but that also is kind of it does get to that point of thinking critically to say like, how much do I actually need this item? Is it going to create that much more value for me today that it's worth purchasing if the potential down the line of just holding this Bitcoin becomes exponentially greater? And so that's really where the thinking through the mind games of like, how do I truly analyze this? If I'm thinking about Bitcoin as my basis of an account.
Yeah. No, and we've been tackling this on episode after episode about how will cash flow like be valued, or sats flow, like how will sats flow be valued? Like if for a small business, if this pizza oven is creating X amount of USD in revenue per month, but then that USD revenue per month is going down as measured in sats units, but the purchasing power of those sats units is going up, like
Yeah.
this whole ability to view your business in Bitcoin and in USD, I think is super important. That's how I do it personally. Like, so that's
Yeah.
how my wife and I do it personally. Like, we have an
Yeah.
Excel sheet that we constantly tweak, like week after week after week, to continue to show us new things of tracking our like income and net worth, like in both currencies.
Yeah.
How?
But I
Okay,
guess
about yeah. Go ahead.
to your point as well, though, I think one thing you can do overall as a business, what you're always trying to do, right, is say, is my business more valuable today than it was yesterday? And so naturally, that's if I'm working, I have $10,000, I got revenue $1,000, didn't spend anything, my business is worth more, right? Similarly, I think you can do that with, if you look at it on a Bitcoin standard, you say like, do I have more sats at the end of this month than I did at the beginning? And if I don't, why is that? Is it because I made a good purchase and I'm confident that because I I gave up some Bitcoin or potential Bitcoin, right? If you use USD, I'm confident I'm going to create more of that in the future. I think
Mhm.
a good example of this, kind of the way I would think about it, is that's a lot of what Bitcoin mining essentially is, the calculation there of like, I might have to give up a Bitcoin to buy some miners, and then my thought is, oh, over time those Bitcoin are going to be, I'm going to get more sats than what I paid for it,
Mhm.
right? And so
Mhm.
that's the calculation that Bitcoin miners are doing. I think we're talking about that actually applies to all businesses if they're under a Bitcoin standard.
Dude, that makes me so excited hearing you say that. Like, I fully agree. The way that you just said, like, USD is just Bitcoin you could have had, like, and the way you said, correct, mining pizzas is mining Bitcoin. Like,
Right.
it is, and this is, I'm very passionate. Like, Bitcoiners need to own things. We need to own things. There needs to be economic activity flowing in and through the Bitcoin network. Like, and so, no, very passionate about that, which is why, so like, say the Bitcoin, so the Bitcoin's on the balance sheet. I want to talk about an owner or a set of partners pulling their share from the business. Like, what is the pros and cons of the excess profits or the profits going into Bitcoin on the balance sheet of the small, medium-sized business, or the owners taking the distribution and then those excess distributions being on their own personal balance sheets, like in whichever unit they want? What's your pros and cons there?
Yeah. So this is probably outside my direct area of expertise, and that you get a lot of tax implications involved.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously it's going to vary, but I think to kind of your question, pros and cons, it really does go to, if I'm pulling that out, how am I doing it? Is it via salary or dividend distribution? There's tax implications there. And also when you're doing it, I guess, as well, right? So if you're a company and you made a bunch of Bitcoin last year and Bitcoin's at 20,000, it might be a good time to distribute that to people. And that if you're going to do it eventually anyways, it's going to be at a lower rate. So directly to the kind of the individual owners, it's a lower tax burden to them. Alternatively, though, potentially you need that Bitcoin more if you're using it for spending, and so you might not have the flexibility there when it's down. And so there's going to be a whole bunch of implications there. It really does, I think, have to go back to, do you see the business as kind of needing a certain what's your kind of your certain base that needs to be in the business? And for a kind of a consulting independent contractor, assets in a business are going to be much less important than somebody who's kind of doing more kind of infrastructure, retail, that type of thing, where they're going to have kind of constant costs, things they need to rebuild, I think.
Yep. The GAAP, is GAAP set down by the FASB, Financial Accounting Standards Board also, or is GAAP another thing?
So yes, kind of GAAP is your overarching structure. The FASB is the one that would make any changes to it.
Okay.
And so it is kind of going to the generally accepted accounting principle. It is a framework. And so you're not going to get a 100% answer to every question. It really does try to provide principles, like it's saying in there, to say, if we apply these principles fairly and accurately, this is how we should treat these businesses. So
Yep. Perfect. Okay, one more flow on the small to medium size, and then I want to flip over to the public side and get a little bit deeper on that. Let's talk about we talked about balance sheet treatment. I want to talk about transaction treatment just briefly. Say the business, the restaurant, like, is running open note at the counter, like, does have their like Bitcoin bank account, whether it's self-custody or an exchange, like, set up. Say they have their flow and they have the meetup at the exchange or at the bar, once a week. So they get, $250 worth of Bitcoin through the counter, every single Thursday. All right. And then I'm even going to throw one more curveball at it because we're dreaming big right now. Say one of the breweries that delivers a keg once a month also is getting paid in sats. Okay. So say we like really orange pilled this town. We got the meeting at the bar once a week with the flow. And then we have one other brewery from one city over delivering a keg, and they want a little piece of it, so it goes all the way. Talk us through what's happening for that bar owner with that flow.
Yeah, so that's, I think, really just where your tracking of your transactions becomes really important, and that what you did at which times really ends up being important. But it kind of essentially to your question of what kind of happens throughout that process. You buy the Bitcoin, right? You have a cost basis. You have to track that. You're receiving those Bitcoin in on a weekly basis. So you're valuing that Bitcoin at the time it's received. So it could go up and down, but if I sold somebody a $10 beer, that's what the Bitcoin's going to be priced at. So that's money coming in. Add that to your cost basis, right? So you kind of end up adjusting your cost basis as you go along. I have X amount of Bitcoin at X amount cost, and then you're then paying some out, right? And so that price that you value that Bitcoin going out at, it's going to be at the time, but then you have this third factor of what's the gain or loss on the what I paid to the distributor, right?
Yep.
So I don't know that there's any hard rules in place right now of what you need to do. I think your first step is, do I have all the documentation and records complete so you can get to an answer? And then you have how do I want to deal with it from a GAAP standpoint, which is, I think, the easier side of it, to say what logically makes sense to me, value it at the time, purchase, receive, pay. That's straightforward. More complicated is going to be the tax side, in that there's there is guidance there, but it's somewhat vague. It doesn't point you in a certain direction all the time as far as which Bitcoin you need to use for your cost basis.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure that will change over the years. I don't know if it will change in our favor, but that there'll be some certainty around it. But I think from before you get to that tax side of things at the end of the year where you need to report your taxes, I think from a business owner standpoint, you can say, hey, as long as I have a good record of all my transactions, right? Staying on top of it so you don't have hundreds of transactions to do at once, and a good logic for why you're valuing the Bitcoin that you're paying out the way you are, you're going to be safe there from a audit review standpoint. Even if someone comes back and says, hey, this is all wrong, we're doing it differently now, you're going to be able to say, well, I was doing it this way at, let's just say we do it based on average cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did it this way because this made sense logically. This is the way I think about my business. If you're doing that and you have records of it, you're going to be in good shape.
Perfect. No, I'm just, it's just awesome that we ran through that. I'm just pumped up. Okay, let's swap over to every episode. We ask someone to explain a tweet. So yours is going to be, you have tweeted, it was a retweet of Michael Saylor talking about congratulations to the Bitcoin community this morning. This is Michael Saylor's tweet. By unanimous vote, 7-0, Financial Accounting Standards Board agreed to add a project to review accounting for exchange traded digital assets and commodities. Satoshi Pacioli quote retweeted it and says, fundamentally, accounting is about providing an accurate and consistent picture for investors and stakeholders of the financial health and performance of a business. Value in Bitcoin at the lower of cost or the market distorts the value of a company holding Bitcoin versus non-holders. Talk us through all of this. Start at the high level of just, I love how you laid out, like, this is the purpose of accounting, to just like lay the framework, and then talk about what Saylor is getting into and why Bitcoin's treatment on public balance sheets is frustrating right now.
Yeah. So starting with kind of Saylor's point there, and potentially a change that I think would be good, is saying what he's trying to get at is, and trying to get pushed through, is we're going to value Bitcoin on a fair market basis, which is real straightforward. Basically how everything else that you count as an investment at least is tracked. And so back to your stove example for the pizza factory, they're not gonna revalue that on a monthly basis, but you are for any investments, right? And if you're a publicly traded company buying Bitcoin, that's probably how you look at it, right? And so it makes perfect sense. Just like if you were to buy stock or mutual funds or whatever, you're going to value it monthly revalue it monthly as it goes along. It's going to change on your balance sheet because it's worth something different to you. If you were to sell it, that's what it's worth, right? That's a logical way to look at it. Where they kind of initially put it, and the reason it really is just a terminology thing, which is really weird the way it worked out. Where they put it was with intangible assets, which kind of makes sense just verbally, right? Of like, is Bitcoin tangible? No, I can't touch it. Oh, let's put it in intangible assets. Where that gets really weird is intangible assets is something like goodwill, where if I'm a business and I purchase another business, they have $10,000 on their, as assets, and I pay 15 because I think it's worth more than that. We're going to value the $5,000 as goodwill. And so the rules of that around that is, once I put that $5,000 on my balance sheet that I paid more for it, I'm not going to actually increase that, which is the rule that they're putting Bitcoin under. I can reduce it if I say I overpaid and it's not worth that anymore. So that is the current structure that Bitcoin's getting treated under now, which just doesn't make logical sense. Besides, the only way I can kind of wrap my head around it is if you just call it intangible assets. That kind of sounds like Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's kind of the current structure. I'm sure that will change. Just logically, it makes sense that it would. How long it takes going through the process, but I mean, I forget it was unanimous though, as far as the kind of the initial review of it, which makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, who, what other problems are there out there? Or I guess that's really broad, but are there any other things related to like this area of just like treatment of it on public balance sheets that you think like FASB is going to kind of uncover while they're doing this review? Or like, who are these 7 people? Like, what have we? I'll throw this in the mix also. I replied to this Sailor tweet also, and I said, I reject the entire framing. I don't think we should be congratulating FASB, or I think FASB should be congratulating us, I'm congratulations for like entering the future. Like USD. Speak about intangible assets. Like, is there any accounting treatment for marking down like the purchasing power of USD losing? Like, there's no ability to do that currently.
I
Right?
think that's a really good point. Like, there's actually, I mean, we talked about what's the purpose of accounting, right? How do I accurately gauge the performance of my business? When you have a money that doesn't really reflect truth all the way,
Mm-hmm.
when I present my balance sheet, it's not going to give a great accurate picture all the time. And so that's an interesting way to look at it. I guess to your point of like, who are these 7 people? It's going to be people that have worked for a long time in the accounting industry and they're used to what they're looking at, right? And so,
Yeah.
um, Bitcoin as an industry is very kind of conservative, or sorry, accounting as an industry is very
Mm-hmm.
kind of conservative. Like, don't make changes quickly, really think through things. Just as far as treatment as well, like you don't recognize something until you're 100% certain of it, or 95%, whatever the case. And so that's kind of the mentality and the thought process of a lot of people that are in that position. Um, but it is a logical and uh, I think at least I guess what's the right word for it? A truthful profession, right? Like, you're trying to
Yeah.
get to the
Yes.
truth, and so that
Totally.
those changes will come. But it's a mindset shift to say like, yeah, you presented your balance sheet in U.S. dollars, and you said you had 5% more cash than you did last year, but actually your business might be in worse shape. Um,
Sure.
that's not something that anyone's kind of thinking through at this point. The closest you kind of
Yep.
could get to it is if you're doing kind of discounted cash flows when you're valuing things, right? There are there are interest rates baked in there based on assumptions of interest free rates and all that, and that gets thrown up in the air. If I'm trying to value a lease based on discounted cash flows and trying to decide what should I do, if I think inflation's 2% versus 9% versus 20%, those calculations are completely different and they completely change the analysis that you're going to do and the decisions that you're going to make. So I think that's
Yeah.
a big gap right now in the current system.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask this also because I don't. Part of the reason why I want to have this conversation, want to do this podcast about like the intersection of Bitcoin and personal finance, whether it's for individuals or like businesses, is that I don't just want to be that like armchair quarterback, throwing out tweets of like, no, FASB, like Bitcoin, we're way ahead of blah, blah, all this stuff. Like I recognize that I have to ask even the basic questions of like, how does even a business bank account work? Like, how does mechanically the money get to the Bitcoin exchange? Like, I've never signed payroll checks. Like, I've never been a part of that. So it's like, what other, like what other kind of, what do you think what are more things that do you think non-business owners kind of like misunderstand about like being on the side of like analyzing business balance sheets and like trying to make decisions and like being producers in the world? Like, what do you think, do you see like a miscommunication there of just like what it's like to run a business, and like what can people understand more that have never done it before?
Um, that's a good question. I think kind of your Bitcoiner that's really familiar with Bitcoin that hasn't. I mean, everyone's kind of worked in the business, right? But minimal kind of contact with the accounting side of things. I think there's going to be some just misunderstandings of the way things work today. I don't think that's always necessarily a bad thing, and that if you work in a system for 15 years, you're going to be kind of used to it, and that's kind of be your default. You're going to pair everything to it. But I think it is important I think it's really important to know the trade-offs, right? And so Bitcoiners know all the advantages of Bitcoin, but inherent in that is kind of one example is ACH payments, right? And so we know that Bitcoin's much cheaper and faster than ACHs, which can take, 3 days potentially from when I send it to when it gets to the next business. The flip side of that is there are really good controls and efficiencies around ACHs. And so if I'm a business and I have AP that I'm paying that week, I might pay 500 vendors at once, right? With one ACH payment that cost me $30. And I have controls to know that those 500 payments are going to the right place.
Mm-hmm.
How we duplicate that and how we generate that in a Bitcoin world, whether it's via Lightning or something, is something that's not set up today, right? And so,
Yes.
to the point of, I'm a individual, I'm not going to be making 500 payments, but a medium size and certainly a large company is going to be doing that. And so, if we're saying we're getting rid of the system altogether and ACHs aren't part of it, what do you have to build to make it so I can make 500 Bitcoin payments, know that they're going to the right place, and feel really good about that? And so that's just kind of one of the examples where I've dealt with it on the traditional side. It's not perfect, but it works well, and it's not built into Bitcoin yet.
Dude, talk to us more about the ACH network. Like, I've been trying to tweet out more about this, and I've been thinking about, because so pay me in Bitcoin trend took off. Now more than one exchange has you go on the back end of your ADP, type in your checking and routing number from Cash App, from Coinbase, from Shred, from the thing, and then boom, like your paycheck is Bitcoin now.
Yeah.
Dude, the next logical step of that now is, okay, now like that is the ACH network. Like when you're typing in, when your Bitcoin exchange now gives you a checking account and a routing account number, that's now a Bitcoin exchange that speaks Bitcoin and speaks ACH. So we have inbound ACH, and same thing with Plaid. When I type in my Plaid credentials and give my checking account right access to the exchange to send the ACH to the exchange, we have this flow of ACH. Talk to us about ACH network in general, and talk to us about what do you think about outbound from Bitcoin balance to my mortgage or to my vendor?
Yeah, so this is one that I probably need to dive into more, and that I see it working, and I don't know 100% how it all works on the back end. But if you take Strike, for example, right, they're kind of in the forefront of this to say, I can link up my bank account to Strike, they'll pull money out of my account, and I can buy Bitcoin right away, right? But the money's not at Strike yet. And so there's something happening there where there's obviously they can cover risk and everything, but I'm getting Bitcoin and they don't have my money yet. And so that's an interesting way to think about it. To be able to say, we essentially, you have wire, or you have routing number and account number. There's wires and there's ACHs. Sometimes they're the same number, sometimes they're not. But just kind of
Are
keep it
those the
simple.
only two ways to send USD? That just popped into my head. Are wire and ACH, is that the only two options? What are the other options?
That's the only that I've really done.
Yeah.
Yes. And so wires, they're more expensive, $20, $30. They're easy for a business, but you do them one at a time. I've never even done one personally, just as an individual. So they're just more complex, but they get there, instantly, 20 minutes, whatever the case is, however long the bank takes, but it gets there right away. It's a different routing flow versus
Yeah.
ACHs where they're cheaper. There's probably reconciliations between the bank going back and forth, but they're also reversible, right? And so, I've done this in business before where you send the wrong payment to the wrong person or whatever, and there's ability to pull it back, right? There's benefit there for a business. That's certainly a nice safeguard to a current system, but it it's not kind of, it doesn't work the same way as Bitcoin does, right? It's a, I guess it's the debt system versus moving assets. So
Yep.
I send out a whole bunch of money, right? And it goes from my bank account. It's going to get to your bank account eventually. But really, there's a whole bunch of debt between banks that are going back and forth, so that really they're saying, we're going to get you the money. It'll get there eventually. But in between times, there's kind of risk between the banks. And that's kind of what they're handling versus Bitcoin. They're saying, I'm going to send this payment. It's going to get there in 10 minutes or instantly in Lightning. And everything's finalized.
Yep.
So I don't know if I
Yep.
got to your original question there, but
No, I mean that's it. I just think I'm continuing to try to get my brain to like roll over the ACH network a lot right now also, because
yeah,
I think it goes all the way back to the flow that we talked about of like of a restaurant, taking one night's worth of Bitcoin payments, paying out one keg. I don't think that's that far away. Like I think there are business owners potentially listening to this or like just on Bitcoin Twitter that are ready for that stage. Like
yeah,
today, right now in America, like I think there are small business owners that are ready for that stage, and they have enough Bitcoiners that now know each other in one place. So that means that then we're XYZ short amount of months to needing to understand more about the ACH like connection.
yeah.
So
Well, yeah. I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I think the big opportunity there is to be able to say to somebody, hey, if you're accepting Bitcoin and not paying in Bitcoin, we just go right in Bitcoin, right? And so I think that's an easier gap to cover. I guess the other part that we didn't cover, which is also factored in here as far as payments, is credit cards, right? And there's huge incentives there to be able to say, hey, we're not going to go through the credit card network. It's faster. Consumers know credit cards are easy. You swipe them, it happens right away. Any vendor is going to know, hey, these get batched up and sent to me, and sometimes they're chargebacks, and so there's big incentives there for vendors to start saying, hey, Bitcoin's a better alternative for me, and them actually pushing consumers in some way potentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you two more questions. My last question is just like if you have any other thoughts on kind of how inflation or just kind of the current economy is like making it hard on small to medium sized like accounting. And and then the last question we try to ask every guest is what's a Bitcoin product or service that doesn't exist yet that you wish did exist? So let's
Yeah,
cover both of those and then we'll just talk about just kind of your business and who your ideal client is.
yeah,
So yeah, any other thoughts on just kind of inflation or just like struggles with like small to
yeah.
medium accounting right now?
Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people were caught off guard on. Previously, to kind of start my own thing, I worked at a trade association where we had, small, medium size construction industry businesses all around the country. And so for them, it was really tracking like, hey, how is building, how is new projects, and that was kind of all tracked through a pandemic, and things were better than anyone thought, right? And so it was like, oh, things are good, we're still kind of hesitant, cautious, but no one was saying, what happens when my materials go up by 10, 20%? How do I price that in? And so that was, I left it at the end of 2021, but that wasn't part of the conversation at that time. It wasn't saying like, how do we protect ourselves? And so I think if you're a business that's going along, potentially been doing it for 20 years, you kind of know the landscape, and then all of a sudden you get hit with inflation that you don't expect, and then you go to your customers and you say, hey, we have to raise our prices, and they don't understand. I mean, they're seeing it everywhere as well,
Yeah.
right? But they're saying, I was going to pay $500,000 for this house. Now you're telling me it's going to cost 600,000. I don't have an extra
Yeah.
100,000, right? And so that's just that kind of that rolling effect where it happens at the creator level, where if you're in construction, you're building the house, it rolls on the consumer. And so there's just a rolling effect there where you don't see it all at once, but in 2022 to 2023, you kind of get these rolling effects that will probably last longer than people think, where, CPI might go down to 5%, but there's still a bunch of people struggling.
Yeah. Yeah. What, any thoughts on a Bitcoin product or service that doesn't exist yet that you wish existed?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I think there's a bunch of good stuff being built uh, that I wouldn't try to be an expert and say, hey, there's something that's missing out there
Yep.
necessarily. There's just a ton of people working on, Fediment stuff came out yesterday that people are really excited about. And it's just like there's a whole bunch of stuff being worked on that I'm not even aware of, right? So
Yep.
I think people are working on a bunch of things. Whether everything's right, we'll get through it. And if there's some stuff that will work and there's some stuff that won't, right? But I think we're headed in the right direction. I mean, I think for me, kind of thinking of it as an accountant, one of the things that we don't have a ton of in Bitcoin for good reason is kind of trust throughout the industry, right? Where we're a group of people that say like, I want to see everything, verify it, and so you have like kind of don't tell me about it, prove it. And I think that's a good mentality to have. But like, how as we go along and mature as an industry, do we build whether it's tools or relationships to be able to say like this person has been in the industry for a certain amount of time, they've been a good actor. How can we kind of build up that trust, especially as you're going to bring more and more new people in, right? The bear market is like seeing, companies do well, companies fail. So a lot of that happens over time. But how do we kind of build that quicker so there's fewer people that kind of get hurt by it without kind of over policing things and shutting off innovation. So I don't know what the answer is there, but kind of trying to build that trust would be really valuable, I think.
I think that's a good word, and I think you're a part of that. I think you're like Satoshi Pacioli is an answer to previous answers to this question. So yeah, cool, man. Tell us. So wrap up on where can people get in touch with you and like who your ideal client is right now.
Yeah. So Satoshi Pacioli is Pacioli, still getting used to the name. So you can get SatoshiPacioli.com or Satoshi Pacioli on Twitter. Either one, you get in touch with me. Any Bitcoiner, I have to say that's either building a Bitcoin company or it's just kind of a personal Bitcoiner that might have questions. Additionally, one of the things I'm kind of working on, and I'd love to get kind of market feedback on it, is building just kind of a real brief accounting 101 for founders or new businesses to be able to say like, you might not need me full time or even part time, but there's some kind of fundamental things that we can walk through, and kind of packaging that up to spend 2 hours, 5 hours with people. That educational side, I think is really valuable in Bitcoin. I think we can do a lot of that in accounting as well, where we say accounting is not complicated. It's, hundreds of years old, right? Like we talked about. There's some fundamental things that everyone, especially Bitcoiners, can easily grasp. And so providing that for people, packaging it up so that they can run 90% of the way there before they're ready to bring on a full-time accountant or whatever the case is. So early, founders, Bitcoiners, any established companies that just need a little extra support temporarily, feel free to reach out. I'd love to dive in. It's just me right now, kind of have a broad background experience, but I'd love to bring on some tax experts, finance experts, based on really the needs of the community.
Love it. Love it. Hey, thanks so much for your time today. Hey, everyone listening, hit the thumbs up button, hit the follow button, drop a comment below, and send this to a small business owner, a Bitcoiner small business owner in your life. Very thankful for your time today, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey all, this is Brian. You can reach me on Twitter at Brain Harrington. Shoot me a DM with any feedback from today's episode. This has been a Choice App production. Bitcoin is becoming centric to personal finance, and we want to help you learn how to better engage with Bitcoin financial services. None of this is financial advice and is for education and entertainment only.